Pod Save the World is brought to you by The Great Courses.
The Great Courses!
Tommy's favorite ad of all time.
Let's learn. In today's world, it's important to find ways that you can trust to stay engaged and informed about the world around you. That's why I've been telling you about
Twitter.
The Great Courses.
When was there a world that it wasn't true? You know?
Yeah. If you haven't signed up yet, what the hell are you waiting for? You can get unlimited access to fascinating insights from leading professors and experts about anything that interests you. History, science, art, music,
geology.
You can even learn a new language or pick up a new hobby like photography. There are over 9,000 lectures that you can watch at any time, or listen podcast style through the Great Courses Plus app. That's a cool new feature. And they're giving my listeners a free trial with unlimited access to enjoy all of the lectures, but you need to go to our special URL. Start exploring today. Sign up at thegreatcoursesplus.com/crookedworld. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/crookedworld.
I feel like I need this. It needs a tagline.
Yeah.
Great Courses.
The Great Courses. They put the smarts in smart online course thing.
Welcome back to Pod Save the World. Thank you guys for tuning in as always. I want to talk a little bit about Syria for a minute. There's a lot of talk out of Washington lately about the gains our military has made against ISIS in Syria. And while that is true, that we've taken back a lot of territory from ISIS, the reality is the war in Syria is getting worse. If you're a civilian living on the ground there, you are getting bombed by the regime day in and day out. You are caught in fighting between regime forces and rebel forces. It is a horrific situation. And the way we know about how bad the situation is brave journalists and photographers that go in and document what's happening. That is a role my guest today is very familiar with. His name is Jonathan Alpery. He has documented conflict zones across the planet. And in our interview today and in his book, he talks about what it was like to get kidnapped by rebel forces for 82 days in Syria. It is a harrowing story. He talks about what it was like being held by these people, how he got out, and what he has done upon returning home to try to help others who are taken captive like he was. I think you'll enjoy the interview, and thanks again for tuning in. My guest today is Jonathan Alpery. He's a photojournalist and author who has shot photos in at least 9 conflict zones. His book, The Shattered Lens, A War Photographer's True Story of Captivity and Survival in Syria, recounts the 81 days he spent in Syrian rebel captivity in 2013. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show and joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, so you were on your 3rd assignment in Syria in 2013 when suddenly you found yourself handcuffed, blindfolded, beaten and held captive for nearly 3 months by a group of Syrian rebels. You had reported from a whole bunch of dangerous places before. How did this trip take such a disturbing turn with you being kidnapped by these individuals?
Well, first to answer this question, it's important to understand that different conflicts have different kinds of danger levels. Mm-hmm. And Syria was at a very high level in terms of the possibilities of getting killed or kidnapped. And the reason is because this was a very hotly still is a very hotly contested conflict where you have multiple players involved, foreign and domestic players. And when you have these kinds of conflicts that are desperate in some fashion, all rules are out. And therefore, kidnappings are a good way to fund your rebel group or to fund whatever agenda you might have.
Yeah. So speaking to the risk, so I mean, you were very honest in the book. You went in this pretty clear-eyed about the risks. You write about going to a lecture by a very experienced war reporter named Sebastian Junger and asking him, hey, what do you think about going to Syria? And he said point blank, it's just too dangerous there now. Why did you think it was important to go anyway and document what was happening when, you know, in particular, when you also discuss how like cell phone cameras and the availability of video has changed the way conflict zones are documented and photographed?
It's an interesting question. Covering the war in Syria was, and I can testify that for most of us who went in to cover it, was also a personal challenge. Mm-hmm. Because when you're a war reporter, you're also kind of like an athlete. You want to expand the envelope as much as you can and see where your threshold is in terms of fear that you might have or how close you want to get to death, and basically look at it in the eyes and then decide whether or not this is for you as a profession or you should be covering this war, you shouldn't. And Syria was a good catalyst for that because I was able to gradually cover from wars are worse and worse and worse. And even when you're inside a conflict zone, then you can decide whether or not you want to go closer to the fighting or you don't, or you want to go to an area that's safer or more dangerous. And Syria was a very good teaching experience for that. And this war was actually my 12th war, and I've covered 13 in total. And Syria was definitely one of the most dangerous assignments I've ever had to cover.
And that's something you talk about in the book, which is that, you know, the sort of the best photos that come from a conflict zone are closer and closer and closer to the front, you know, sort of soldiers actually in action. How do you determine mentally when you should be pushing to get closer versus when you feel like it may not be safe?
Well, I mean, no photos is worth your life.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have to take calculating risks in terms of, is this picture worth taking? If I'm going to cross that street and maybe get killed by a sniper on the way,
right.
Is it worth it? Now, every war reporter, or especially photojournalists, especially photographers, have different levels in terms of their abilities to operate and take these risks. But if you want to take good pictures, it's true, you do have to get closer. And that's, you know, many would agree with that. While reporter rights can be further behind the line and just get information and gather it, the photographer and the cameraman, they have to be on site to get the images. And if there is combat is kind of like the tip of the spear, because you have wars, many different things, from covering, you know, refugee camps to destructions, things, or maybe things that happened a bit in the past. But when you're in combat, that's the ultimate version of war, because you're in it when it's actually forming and happening. And then, of course, it's the most dangerous. And this is really then you can get the feel of it. But it doesn't mean that's where you'll get the best pictures.
Right.
No.
Well, it was interesting reading the book. I mean, it seems like I came away thinking you were more a student of history and war than a student of photography even. Is that a fair characterization?
No, it is. And I've always been very straightforward about that publicly. Most photographers will tell you, I want the story to be told. I have a lot more, a very different approach, and partially because I was raised differently in the sense that history has always been a very strong sense and have been shaped intellectually. And photography is the medium that allowed me to experience historical moments, and what better ways to experience history than conflict, because wars actually shape nations, and as a European, that's very true.
Right.
And that's important. And photography allowed me to experience it. It turns out I could take a good picture, and I've had a very good career doing that. Do I consider myself purely as a photographer? I do not. I mean, that's part of it. It's part of the mosaic. But there's also a version of me which is, I want to experience these historical moments and bring it to me first, and live it and become that person, and then expand from that experience to others and say, this is why history is tragic, and we have to remember that.
Right, right. So, maybe you could sort of walk us through the sequence of events that sort of led to your capture. You entered through Lebanon, I believe?
Yes. To go to Syria, you had different ways. Turkey was the most common because it was safer,
right,
and just easier to be smuggled through the lines and the borders and go into the rebel zones. Lebanon is trickier because Lebanon is controlled mostly by Hezbollah, and dealing with them, it's not that much better than dealing with
right,
Islamists on the other side.
Right.
So they're also pretty tough and very well organized and very well trained. And but I decided to go through Lebanon because I want to do something a bit different and cover an area that wasn't covered as much. And I had good contacts in Lebanon, so I put two together, and my decision was made.
So, you know, you wrote the people who ultimately captured you and were holding you were under the umbrella of the Free Syrian Army. How did you figure that out? How did they actually take you?
Well, I knew where I was going at first, before I was kidnapped. I mean, when I was in Lebanon,
Right.
So I knew the FSA, Free Syrian Army, was more or less in control of that area in the Kalamoun Mountains. And knowing that, you kind of know who you might be dealing with, even though you know the rebel groups are very separated and they have different understanding of how they should be fighting this war. But I was smuggled from Lebanon in a town called Arsal, which at the time, and that's a small town in northern Lebanon, was controlled by pro-FSA groups, let's just put it that way.
Pro-rebel groups.
Yeah, who were anti-Bashar al-Assad
Right.
mostly. and they were surrounded by Hezbollah mostly. So you go through, and then I got into this town called Yabrut, which is at the time the big hub they controlled, the rebels, that is. And I was there, and I was covering the fighting from there, and that was my base of operation.
Right. You were very clear about how terrifying this was. Immediately, there were mock executions. They were firing a pistol right next to your head. I mean, in that moment, did you think, this is it? I'm not coming back from this trip?
Not always. It's very strange. I would say you do not think that terrible things are going to happen to you. And maybe that's a sense of survival. I'm not sure. So if you're being executed, or mock executions, like you say, which is the right term, you don't think it's going to happen. And partially because I was covering the war from their side, and you're trying to be rational. So you're trying to rationalize everything, and you say, well, wait a minute. I'm covering your side. I'm risking my life. I'm telling your story, but you're still going after me. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Obviously, rules in war don't apply. Logic has a different meaning.
Right.
But you also try to reassure yourself. So there's a lot of psychological work you're doing on yourself at the time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So an interesting sort of footnote or side note is you were able to get into Syria because of the help of a fixer. And I bet that's a term people listening haven't necessarily heard before. But they are critical for a war correspondent, really for any foreign correspondent. If you're in China reporting for the New York Times, you probably have a fixer who can connect you with the right people and translate and do all the things you need. In your book, you have a description of a fixer that I love. You said, you call them, quote, sort of a cross between a foster brother and Virgil leading Dante through the various circles of Inferno. What did you mean by that? Who are these people? Like, what did they do for you?
Well, that's because they do everything for you. Right. So they fix things for you, from translating to you need a bathroom, whatever you might need. So you're kind of like, it's kind of like a parent, but who has your life in their hands. And they also, more importantly, have contacts who allow you to go be with a specific rebel group. So they'll facilitate these connections. That's the most important thing. Also, they know the law of the land very well. They know where to go. So they supply their overall thing. And they're very crucial to our work. You're very right. They're crucial. Yeah.
How do you find a good fixer from a bad fixer? Like, I assume there's no fixer Yelp reviews or like...
There should be.
There should be.
That's a good idea, actually. Maybe we should start doing that.
I think we just invented a business.
Yeah,
I'm telling anybody.
5 stars go. 2 stars is not worth
No
it.
good. So how'd you find this guy? Like, did it ever seem just crazy to you that you're putting your life in the hands of someone you maybe just met?
No, it's a very good question. You don't just meet people. You prepare weeks ahead. I mean, you do prepare your trip. Or if you don't have that much time, you can ask other journalists. Even though in my profession it's very competitive, like any profession, but same for us. And we would still help each other out. If anybody tells me you have a good guy on the ground, doesn't matter who he is, what agency, whoever he works for, I would help him, because that's a question of safety, and that's just the right thing to do. So in this case, I had 2 fixers. The first one was a good one. That was through my contacts in Lebanon. And the second one, I decided to trust while I was on site to go to another area where they were fighting. And I believe that's him who facilitated my kidnapping. But, you make mistakes. I mean, I've been covering wars for 15 years, and you can still make mistakes like that.
Absolutely. I'm honestly amazed that it works out the right way more often than not in some of these places, given what you were saying earlier about the enormous revenue you can make from kidnapping for ransom.
No, it's true. But Syria was, but the Middle East in general is tricky as a Westerner. It always has been. That's nothing new. It's worse now, however. And it's tough because there's fixers are, they're there for the money, of course. But like you say, there is always a middleman that plays a role in terms of the kidnapping when it comes to renegotiations to try to get you out. Everybody takes a cut. It's just pure and simple business. So basically, when you're kidnapped, you become merchandise. You're not so much a human being anymore.
Right.
And that's exactly what I tried to portray in the book, where I try to be more humane and therefore have a better condition.
Yeah, I mean, you describe in pretty brutal detail the physical and psychological torture your captors put you through. There were beatings. One guy broke 2 of your ribs, the mock executions we discussed. But it did seem like your relationship evolved over time. You were able to earn their trust, maybe make some of them like you, and sort of like seek out your company. How did that happen?
It's a good question. Well, my mother raised me in a specific way that allowed me to be very resilient to things. And I believe that that was very helpful, number one. Number two, it was always a struggle. I had two different personalities in me at the time. One was like, I just want to go out and kill them, and I had opportunities to do so.
Right.
Just take a machine gun, I can use them, no problem, and
Right.
just take these guys out. That was...
For those listening, you're a pretty big guy. You nearly went to the Olympics for swimming, so you could, have the upper hand at times.
Right, but then I would have gotten killed right after,
Okay.
but taking a few guys out. But so that's partially a fantasy that you have,
Right.
but then you really have to pull yourself back together and be like, this is not what you should be doing. And of course, one of the many things that I did is to make sure that they would like me. So I spent a lot of time being very nice to them, but not in a hypocrite, more like trying to help them with things. And,
Right.
they would be curious about certain things and just automatically jump in that and just give them all the details they want
Right.
in order to be curious about my life back home. And obviously the big subject is women,
Right.
as any places at any time on the planet, and amongst men, that is. And that was always a big curiosity for them, especially for the young ones,
Yeah.
who are all virgins, obviously. So if you're able to exploit these cracks, and then you go right in these cracks, and you can expand, and then you hope that they might forget about your conditions
Right.
of being kidnapped for an hour or two, and that's
Right.
helpful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what you endured is in no way funny, but some of the scenes you described are kind of just bizarre. It was almost like proximity and boredom just drove everybody crazy. You taught one captor how to dance to J-Lo and Pitbull. You had to explain to another what foreplay was by demonstrating with a pillow after he demanded you do so.
Yeah.
You taught another guy how to swim. Could you relax in those moments, or were you always just a captive, terrified?
It's interesting. These moments you describe, you do feel free for a minute, and you automatically, it's a survival thing. I'm not sure, where your brain rewires itself almost, and then you almost have a good time. And when it came to the swimming, when I was in the pool the first time and they filled it up, I really felt like I was almost in the summer camp, because the weather was incredible. Bombs were dropping constantly, but it was a very nice weather. And you're in the pool and you're swimming. It's a very odd moment. It's almost surreal.
You had to teach what sounded like the biggest, fattest, hairiest guy how to swim. When he first got in the pool, he just sort of sank like a rock, right?
Yeah, he was a warlord, and apparently he felt like he needed to improve some skills with swimming, and he didn't know how to swim. So yeah, he started sinking rather. So I grabbed him, and I've been playing water polo for years, so I just tread water really well. So I just kind of holding him. Yeah, he's not a very attractive guy to look at with swim trunks. Anyway, but everybody was making fun of him because, he's a warlord and he's in a very compromising position ultimately. And by the end he could swim. I never fully understood why he wanted to do that, but when they heard I swam because I would talk about it, I think they saw this as something very strange somehow, because no one really learns how to swim in that part of the world. It doesn't happen. So I think they were curious, and when they saw me swim, because there was the first time when I got in that pool 2 days before, then that's probably how it happened.
Pod Save the World is brought to you by SeatGeek.
Love SeatGeek.
Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated. It's confusing, but there is a better way, guys. It's called SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event.
Every single type.
Just a few taps.
Whether you're searching for a
Opera.
last-minute deal or planning a night out or need to find the perfect gift,
Lesbian-themed music festival.
SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician, like Lovett said, in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value.
Comedy.
I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I know you guys do too.
Me too.
It's the easiest way to shop for tickets. You can be anywhere in just a couple taps. Boom, boom, bing. You're
Suddenly,
there.
boom.
You get the tickets.
Some bing.
You're going. You're
Boom.
impressing your friends, your loved ones.
You're laughing. You're listening to
You're enjoying yourself.
Lilith Fair. You're having a great
Encore.
time.
Right,
Encore.
you're present in the moment. You're not just
Not on your
recording
phone.
it on your phone and Snapchatting it and all sorts of stupid
Be
shit.
present in the moment, huh?
With SeatGeek.
With
Your
SeatGeek.
phone isn't. You didn't go to the concert for your phone. Your phone went to the concert for you.
That's right.
You know.
And to get the most bang for your buck,
You know,
SeatGeek
it
grades
is
every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. Plus, Every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports to concerts to comedy and theatre. Best of all, Pod Save the World listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase.
$20? That kind of money, I could get a deep dish pizza.
That's like, that would blow Paul Ryan's mind. $20.
$20
my
bucks.
God.
Oh my God.
You'd be tweeting about that.
How many quarters is that? Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code WORLD today. That's the promo code WORLD for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
Do you think Paul Ryan was wrong to promote his tax bill by putting middle-class families into fans with dollar bills floating up in the air and telling them to grab as
One of
many
those
as they could
boxes.
before the Koch brothers took the remainder?
Yes. That probably wasn't the best move. He regrets that one. Pod Save the World is also brought to you by Betterment. Guys, you know what Betterment is.
I do.
It's the largest independent online financial advisor. The service is designed to help.
Advise me, Betterment.
Well, here's what they do, John. They help improve the customer's long-term returns and lower taxes for retirement planning.
I'm being very serious right now.
Mm-hmm.
When I tell the two of you that I have reached a conclusion, which is I am not going to go with one of those investment advisors that charge a crazy amount. I'm done.
You
They
should
don't
be.
beat the market. I'm
They
not
don't.
doing it
They
anymore.
don't. They couldn't
I'm
predict
not.
this.
I'm doing one of these internet ones.
Were you ever doing it in the first place?
Well, I considered it. Here's the thing. I forgot to write in 2015. But had I...
What kind of advice was your mattress giving you? Did you get some good returns from...
I got to get out of Bitcoin, boys. It's been no good. I put all my 1,600 pen money in Bitcoin.
If you'd done it then, you'd be living large.
I didn't.
Betterment takes advanced investment strategies and uses technology to deliver them to more than 300,000 customers. Based on the information you tell Betterment, they make tailored recommendations for how much you invest, how much risk to take in your portfolio, and the type of investment account you should have. Features like Betterment's socially responsible investing portfolio give you the flexibility to reduce your investment in companies that don't meet certain social, environmental, and governance benchmarks. Basically, you don't invest in assholes. Betterment has low, transparent advisory fees compared to traditional services, only a 0.25% annual fee with unlimited messaging access to their team of licensed financial experts.
I'm sick of relying on expensive humans.
Everything they do is designed to lower taxes and increase returns. Investing shouldn't be confusing or a frustrating experience. Investing involves risk. Pod Save the World listeners can get up to 1 year managed free. For more information, visit betterment.com/crookedworld. That's betterment.com/crookedworld. You know, in the book, you managed to remain remarkably calm. It's like you almost seemed like you had some techniques to do so, like not thinking about home, not daydreaming about an ex-girlfriend or family necessarily, like staying in the moment. Was that something you had figured out earlier in life, or did you just kind of decide in that moment, this is how I'm going to make it through this?
Nothing can ever prepare you for being kidnapped. It's like experience war. Let's say a fight the first time. You're curious about it, so you know, it sounds romantic and sexy, and then it happens, and then you really know if this is for you or not. When it happened to me in 2004, my first big firefight, then I knew I was meant for that. It was built in me.
Where were you in this firefight?
It was in the Republic of Georgia, and I was probably August or September 2004. And I was very drunk, and because they would go on an assault drinking vodka heavily, and they're like, here, have some too, it'll be good for you. And it does remove a lot of your inhibitions, as it would if you, I guess you're at a bar and want to talk to a woman, especially if you're drunk. But so you go, and there's bullets, going around, and you're drunk, which is very stupid because you're being careless. Anyway, I did that, and yeah.
I mean, the other thing that would have driven me insane, I mean, you said a minute ago, you don't know why this guy wanted to learn to swim, but he did. It didn't make any sense. It seemed like nothing they did made sense. They moved you from one place to another. They brought in people who told you you'd be let go, and they were full of shit. That would happen time and time again. Like, that irrationality of it all would make me crazy.
It's because you have to reapply yourself in the context of being in a war zone. So if you're home, then these lies that you're mentioning, it doesn't compute well. But however, if you're in the combat zone, then everything changes. Mm-hmm. And even if you're a nice guy and you're covering their side, therefore you're kind of taking their side in essence, and they're still going after you, and therefore they're doing bad publicity because I'm a well-known international shooter, so this would come out eventually, and it did when I was released. It really makes the Syrian rebellion look very bad, and enough people started, and then James Foley was killed. So, but to them, it doesn't matter. The war effort is what matters the most.
Finally, you were moved several times. There were false promises, like I mentioned. Finally, a rich Syrian connected to the government essentially bought your freedom. Do you have a sense of why he did that? What this guy maybe got out of getting you out of captivity?
It was all very political. Originally, he was looking for 2 other French journalists who had been kidnapped, and he was kind of spitting in the wrong hole. So my luck was incredible because he ended up getting in contact with the rebel group who had me, and he said, well, I'm looking for these 2 guys. Do you have them? It's like, no, we don't, but we have this guy.
it's like car shopping.
Yeah,
it was
like,
bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. Who do you want? And he's like, well, who is he? He's like, well, it's him. He's like, okay. So he sent someone to film me so he would see see what I looked like to make sure it wasn't the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started negotiating money. But the reason why he did this is because a lot of powerful Syrian business people and business politicians, and often it's the same, they do both, are in some sort of a black list, which was created by the European Union and the United States.
Sanctions
Yeah,
list or something.
right. They freeze your assets. You can't travel abroad. It's stringent because a lot of these people have foreign businesses and they can't. And he did in Canada. So he's trying to get out of that list by showing goodwill, by paying a lot of money to release a foreign entity and then hopefully getting out of that list.
Interesting. It's funny that he would cook up that route to get off a sanction list, but hey, whatever works.
It's one way to do it. It kind of worked in the beginning for him, then it didn't because governments don't like to be blackmailed. Usually they don't really do well with that.
Yeah. Did you think that ransom was always the captor's goal and they were just sort of waiting around for the best offer?
When I would ask why I'm here, they would always tell me the same thing. They say, you can't get out because you're surrounded. We are surrounded by Hezbollah troops, which was true, actually. The front was getting close. I mean, you could feel the war was getting worse and worse where we were. But so they would actually lie always and always tell me that I wasn't kidnapped. They would never tell me you're kidnapped. They always say you're here on your free will, but it's not true. But it does make you feel better when you hear that, and they're very smart. They know that. So they're like, oh, so it's okay. But you're not being rational yourself. I knew that I was being kidnapped because it's obvious, but you don't think right. So when they tell you you're not kidnapped, you're like, okay, that's okay. I'm okay. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to live.
Yeah. So finally, this individual bought your freedom. They took you to another house for, I believe, 10 days. That was larger, a little more comfortable.
No. What happened is I was smuggled back to Damascus, and then they smuggled me. It was kind of crazy, but they got me to Damascus, and then he got nervous because what he did was, you're dealing with the rebels, so you never know, with the Bashar government. So he smuggled me back into Lebanon 24 hours later, and then he left after the border, and I went to Beirut with 2 of his men, and he had this incredible apartment overlooking the marina of Beirut. And I knew Beirut well, so I knew where I was, and I escaped there and ended up at the French embassy.
Yeah, so you managed to find a hard line, and you made a call, had someone call you back, and all of a sudden, they're telling you, run 100 yards down the street to a hotel, I believe?
Yeah, there was a Four Seasons very nearby, and I knew the area because I'd been there, so I just walked around, and I'm just waiting like this in front of the hotel, and this car shows up, and it's the French police, and they pick me up, and they drive me to the embassy.
You described the anxiety of waiting for release as a fishbone in your throat. When did you finally spit the fishbone out and sort of feel okay?
Not till the next day, because I remember I had a major panic attack, which I've never had before, and I probably will never have that again. When I woke up the next morning at the embassy, in this beautiful room, my brain didn't realize that I was free. So I spent about half an hour in utter panic trying to remember where I was. Now, you see where you are, but it's weird. Your brain was like, could not connect how it felt where you were. So I had no idea where I was. I completely lost. Wow. And then it kicks back in, and then I was fine.
I can't even imagine. So finally you're out after enduring the hell of 81 days of captivity. But all that time, your parents are dealing with a totally different kind of hell, right? This fear and uncertainty about your situation, worrying about you. Unfortunately, sometimes the way governments interact with families make things worse. They increase that anxiety. They have terrible bedside manner, for lack of a better term, in terms of communicating with people. The United States refuses to pay ransoms. Other governments like France will publicly deny that they pay, but it's clear that they do. It's also difficult for families like yours to know who to talk to in the government. You talk in the book about how it's bizarre that the FBI is handling these cases because they are in charge of missing persons. But why isn't the State Department, right? It was this convoluted system. In fact, some American families were told they could be arrested if they talked about paying for ransom. So it was a pretty,
like Jim Foley's family.
totally
his
fucked
parents.
up system. The Obama administration ended up conducting a big review of hostage policy and reforming it in 2015. We can get into that more. But first thing I want to ask is, like, how did your family and friends deal with those days? Like, what sort of things practically were they working on to try to get you home?
Well, I got bits and pieces of information after, obviously, I came home. And even recently, I found out some stuff I didn't know. My parents, my mother lives in Mexico, my father lives in Maine, but they had this policy, if I can say, to keep it secret.
Right.
Obviously, the governments would agree with that. So that's the way they want it. Some other families want to make it public. Maybe if such a long time has passed, it's time to do that. But they had a mixed feeling. Dealing with the French government went quite well. I think it went well. It's just the way it's set up, with the interaction, everything was different. And dealing with the U.S. government didn't go well. Now, to be fair to the federal government, it's a huge organization and it's a huge country, and dealing with one individual, it's perhaps more difficult in terms of technicalities, how things are constructed. In Europe, France is a much smaller nation, it's less people, so it's you can have a closer relationship with the government in that sense. Now, you're right, the Obama administration, they tried to mend the relationship between the DOJ, for example, and the families, because families were very upset.
Yeah.
And now a question about money, there's always money involved. Often what could happen is the United States can use a third party in terms of a country or an individuals to pay. But usually there's money involved.
Pod Save the World is brought to you by Indochino.
Looking good in that Indochino suit.
Yeah.
As of course you are. It's been made to measure.
We haven't all been together to talk about Indochino in a long time.
We haven't.
I mean, it's bringing me back. Beautiful Maine day. Guys in some suits.
I like to
Love
say
it shouting
I like to say
heteronormative.
that I wasn't losing a friend. I was gaining a friend.
Listen,
That's what I like to say, Tommy.
I know you. You say it a lot.
When are we gonna buy? When are we gonna buy our next set of Indochinos?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But here's
Ask
the
Ronan.
deal. It's the largest custom. It's the largest custom apparel company. They
Leave it
make
in.
suits and shirts to your exact measurements for a great fit. Guys love the wide selection of high quality fabrics and the option to personalize all the details: lapel, jacket lining, and monogram. So much more. Here's how it works. Pick up your fabric, choose your customization, submit your measurements, place your order, and wait for it to arrive in 3 weeks or less. You can shop online at Indochino.com or visit any of their showrooms across North America.
I'm not the hero you want. I'm the hero you deserve.
This week, my listeners can get any premium Indochino suit for just $359 at Indochino.com when entering Crooked World at checkout. That's 50% off the regular price. Why would you pay 100% when you can pay 50% if you go to Indochino.com and enter Crooked World? They're premium made-to-measure suits, guys, and the shipping is free.
This is primo stuff, people.
Primo stuff. Indochino.com, promo code Crooked World for any premium suit for $359 plus free shipping. It's an incredible deal for a perfectly tailored suit.
Just go get
A
one.
deal tailored for you. I think you were probably a little too fair a minute ago to the U.S. government. So some of the reforms they made was basically, we're not going to abandon you. We're going to stand by them. They created a hostage group to coordinate all the disparate parts of government, so they were talking to the right people. And, they had to stop needlessly threatening families and telling them, hey, if you negotiate with a terrorist group, you could go to prison. That is crazy.
I think they wouldn't send you to jail. They might sue you.
Never have, yeah. But
it's a threat. The reason why I'm being nice to the federal government, and trust me, it doesn't happen all the time because it's a heavy structure and it's cumbersome, but the FBI was very good to me.
Got it.
When I came back, and they helped me get money. There was funds. There's
To replace some of the equipment.
and I got quite a bit of money and more than I needed actually to replace things. And I kept good relations with the FBI, and so that kept that was well. So during, not so good, but after, I met some good agents, and they were very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about these endless debriefings that happened after you got back. There were the French authorities, there were the FBI. Am I debriefing you as we speak, or is this was this cathartic writing the book, and now it's a little easier to dig into it?
Like I was saying earlier in the interview, I've always been very resilient, so it could backfire for some things. I'll get into that, but It was cathartic. And one of the things that was very cathartic for me is going back to war.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was kind of getting restless and I was in the US, I was shooting, but I was bored and I needed something extra to go back to my original positioning. So when the war in the Ukraine started, then I was like, that's it. I packed my bag. I went to Paris, to my best friend's house, called a buddy of mine who's a famous reporter in Paris. He's an older gentleman, he's in his 50s now. And we just went to Kiev and we covered the war for 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about how your parents, your poor parents, man, you get back and they're like, all right, we're looking forward to plan B. Like, you want to teach? What's your next thing? Since then, I counted that you've been to Cairo during the revolution, Ukraine on the Maidan during the revolution, Mosul, very safe place in 2017. So what drew you back? Like, can you just not shake the need to be in these places?
It's a question that's being asked to me, and every time I say the same thing, it's a legitimate question, obviously, and it's like a sickness. That's usually the word that I use, and again, I was very realistic when it comes to that, and we all have that bug. I mean, the guys who do this, so soldiers have it too. Yeah. You would have soldiers coming back from the front on leave, and to see their family and not have that connection with that family, and the only thing they want to do is go back.
Right.
You know,
Right.
It's just kind of the same. It's not entirely because we're not working as in a unit, but it's similar because once you have the war drug in your bloodstream, it's very hard to shake, and even though you know that it's not healthy.
Yeah, as a photographer, I mean, there are these iconic photos that can, I think, summarize or a war better than any reporting can. Right? There's horrifying images of a naked little girl who had just been napalmed in Vietnam. I think like catalyzed opposition to Vietnam. There's the photo of Aylan Kurdi lying dead on the beach, a little Syrian boy. I mean, do you think about those images and the political impact as part of your job when you're in these places?
It's not the primary thing. I know my work's going to get well published, so that's a direct consequence of that. Now, when it comes to specific photos that were instrumental in shaping my craft, obviously, and it's true for everybody, there are a couple of photographers, World War II shooters, who were operating on the Russian front, on both the German and the Russian side. Mm-hmm. And I found those very appealing because they're rare, and they're not very well known, so I'm always looking for something that's a little bit off the beaten path, if I can say. And their incredible work, and the atrocity of that conflict just makes it even more. So I try to look for something that's a little different.
Got it. You're clear, honest in the book that you get booked on TV to talk about Syria policy, and you're like, I had this situation. I'm not like a policy expert. I'm certainly not either. But you also said, that you felt like Assad's regime, as awful as it is, was the only thing keeping the country from devolving into total chaos. Do you still feel that way sort of a couple years later? And do you have a sense of like what might be a best case scenario for Syria at this point?
No, but I'm doing my second trip to Syria, and this was when the war started in the beginning of spring 2012, and we were embedded with rebels in northern Syria, a very difficult trip. And already you had a feeling these guys were being, more and more Islamic, and war does that also. And then more foreigners came in, and I talked to CNN, I was on assignment with them, that be careful because I think this is going to be, and it turned out to be true. Of course, the regime of Assad it's not a good regime. It's torturing is their specialty. We all know that. And however, it is difficult for the United States to sometimes have the higher moral ground because we have supported some of these people. And when it doesn't suit our national interests, we switch sides, and we do that all the time. That's nothing new. I agree with you. But when you add on top of that to have a higher moral ground, it doesn't make it as credible. I think trying to get rid of it is a terrible thing. 600,000 to 800,000 people have died. Yeah. Millions are displaced. The country is in complete ruin. Was it worth it? No. Yeah. So, and look at Libya. Libya is the other great example. Gaddafi, he was crazy, but you could talk to him still, and he held it together. Libya is a complete chaos, and now all the mass migration to Europe is coming through here. Yeah. They had a deal with Gaddafi to stop that, and that was the deal. Yeah. And now getting rid of him just unlocked it. So they're very stupid policies.
Yeah. Jonathan Alpery, thank you so much for joining me today. And the book is The Shattered Lens, a war photographer's true story of captivity and survival in Syria. We barely got into the harrowing story of those 81 days, so everyone should buy it and read it. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Pod Save the World. If you like the show, please rate and review us in the iTunes store. It means a lot to me and it helps the show. Talk to you next week.